Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you. Today is a strange day for me. Yesterday, I was at a funeral online because the funeral is taking place in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I wasn't there in person. I would have loved to have been. The funeral was for one of my closest friends of 25 years, Mike Riddell, a Kiwi writer, a minister, a father, a husband, a friend, one of the most magnificent human beings I've ever known. Now, I think you know that I believe all human beings are magnificent, and we're not in a competition over who can be the most magnificent. And Mike would really not want much fuss to be made about him. But I want to share with you about him because it helps me to live better, to have the memories of this man who, when I say he was one of the most magnificent humans I've known, what I mean is he lived fully. He tuned into his magnificence, maybe more than most of us do. And I think that's what he would want for all of us. Mike came into my life in 1997. I heard him speak at the Greenbelt Festival in England. He was speaking about a chapter in the Christian Testament from the book of Acts, Acts chapter 10, a story about one of the apostles having a dream in which there's a vision of meat sacrificed to idols. And Peter is the apostle. Peter hears the voice of God saying, "Don't call unclean that which I have made clean." This passage has been traditionally interpreted to be simply about how Jewish people and Gentile people could both be Christians, and that Gentiles didn't need to become Jewish before they could become Christians. And sure, it probably meant that at one level, but how Mike interpreted it was even deeper and broader. What Mike interpreted it to mean was that if we could put ourselves in the mind of Peter at the time of seeing this vision, it would be like God saying that God had changed God's mind. And for Peter the apostle, the notion that God could ever change God's mind would be impossible. Impossible. It would be challenging the foundations of everything he believed. You know, it would be like tearing up the Constitution of the United States and writing a new one. It would be like saying that borders that have been on maps for centuries might deserve to be redrawn. It would be a shattering of deeply held beliefs. And Mike was showing that what was happening in this story and what can happen today still was not that God was changing God's mind about people, but that people were changing our mind about God. That our vision of God was too small. That God, love, reality with a capital R, is so all-embracing, so inclusive, so welcoming, that a human perspective on love and embrace and welcome can't possibly reach the extent of God's love, embrace, and welcome. Mike spoke these words almost nonchalantly. You know, he wasn't a kind of a thunderous public speaker. It was conversational. But it was also deeply internalized in him because he had experienced this love for himself and he had mirrored it to others. And I think actually he had claimed it for himself by mirroring it to others. What I mean by that is Mike had suffered, Mike had experienced wounds and burdens, perhaps more than most. But he did not remain subject to those wounds and burdens. He still carried them, but he had learned to work with them, to maybe dilute them. Maybe that's a disrespectful way to put it, but certainly he would get up in the morning, and by practices of prayer and meditation and being in community with others, he would share those wounds. And he knew that the path to healing your own pain would always include offering a glass of cold water to a thirsty stranger or a blanket to a cold one. That the hospitality that he wanted to experience within himself, the love that he wanted to experience within himself, would best be found at the end of a pathway that began with him opening the doors to others. And that's what he did for me. And he did it for 25 years. I'm privileged to have been to Aotearoa, New Zealand 7 times, just because Mike and Rose, his spouse, and their family lived there. They visited me several times too. I felt so at home with them in various different houses, in various different countries and physical locations. I felt at home in their hearts, because when they talked to me, they looked at me as being more worthy than I look at myself. They looked at me with a twinkle in their eyes. They looked at me as their beloved friend. And I felt that love, and I feel it today. So, for this little video in our course on how not to be afraid, I want to share some of Mike's words that were written at a time where he was holding great pain and burden with people very close to him. And he was also experiencing a significant health challenge. I offer it as we imagine the fear that we'll be broken forever, or the fear of the world, or just the general fear that things will never be all right. Here's some of Mike's words. I coin my agony into words, becoming a writer. Always I am reaching for some sort of understanding, but it never comes. While I consider myself a liberated male, I still find it difficult to ask for help. Instead, I pour my sorrow into the bowl of a paragraph and lose myself in the mystery of meditation. Who can heal what can't be healed? To bastardize those resplendent words of Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything. That's how the truth gets out. I seek humility and humanity in my swamp of self-doubt. I prospect for kindness and mercy and tolerance. My armor is rusted, my helmet broken, my loins ungirded. No doubt I could still employ social power, but the ambition has gone. The simple act of living is sufficient. I feel the sun on my face, the breath in my lungs, the wind in what's left of my hair. I am content with these. There's love at loose in the world, and I often experience it. I continue to dribble sentences into my soup, but no longer feel that I need to convince anyone with them. I recognize that my own need to write is more vital than finding readers for my scribblings. I have a tendency to feel guilty for my own stupidly lucky life. It's the equivalent of survivor guilt. None of us are responsible for the way we come into life, only how we leave it. I could spend my time cultivating shame on behalf of my privileged contemporaries, but I choose not to. To quote Cohen faithfully this time, I have tried in my way to be free. We are all called to be alchemists, to take the raw material that has been inherited and make of it what we can. I admire deeply those who have managed to transform oppression into leadership, but I don't regret that I'm not among their number. I was and am deeply privileged by birth. It would seem pathetically tragic and hypocritical to envy the struggles of others, but I do admire them. If at times I feel an outsider in my own society, it's because of my own choices and mistakes rather than through prejudice. This is a hunger for belonging, and one that I suspect every person on the planet feels keenly. My true wealth lies in having people around me who love me for who I am. In that regard, I am the most charmed of men. I love Mike saying, I recognize that my own need to write is more vital than finding readers for my scribblings. And whether you're a writer or your creativity manifests in another way, I think Mike would want to say blessings to you, blessings to us all. Step into the vitality of your need to create. Create a conversation, create a meal, create a pathway for somebody, create a channel to yourself. Consider yourself as worthy as you consider the person you love the most. Experiment with it. Mike is on the other side now with many of his loved ones, some of his most dear ones who'd gone before. And I'm confident that he's rooting for us, just as all your beloved forebears are rooting for you. Trying to be free is maybe an oxymoron, actually. Another of my friends who passed away perhaps, well, certainly earlier than I wanted him to, John O'Donoghue, often said that when you enter into freedom, possibility comes to meet you. And I like to hold that in one hand. And Leonard Cohen's invocation, I have tried in my way to be free. And this week, however you find it, however you try for it, or whether it just arrives on your lap, I wish you freedom. And we'll talk again soon.